Donald Trump often says that tariffs not only is going to bring back industries, but he also talks about how it's a powerful weapon against other countries. And I wanted to play this for you.
One very big power over China, and that's tariffs. And they don't want them, and I'd rather not have to use it, but it's a tremendous power over China.
To me, U.S. decline and the decline of the empire is far worse than just any singular recession. Solutions like this being promoted tend to have a pretty disastrous consequences, not only for the world, but also for the people, the workers that are going to be affected by them inside of the United States.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing for me as an economist when someone says something that you would give a poor grade to an undergraduate in a course in economics or international trade, that no one is teaching him even the most basics. I don't care that he never chose to learn it in the past. I don't admire that, but I understand why he might be busy. But to articulate it as policy without anyone in his circle able to say, excuse me, Mr. President, this doesn't work. Well, let me show you why it's so silly. Let's suppose Mr. Trump were right, and that the tariffs are a powerful tool to use against China. All that means is if you hit Chinese goods with tariffs, like Biden and Trump did with the electric cars, you will make Americans not buy them. All right, now let's follow the logic. An American company is producing something that competes in the world with a company in Africa and another company in Europe. And part of the production of all three of these companies requires trucking. They need to truck their inputs into their factories. They need to truck their outputs out of them. And so they are buying electric trucks. Okay, the one in Africa and the one in Europe buys the best truck at the lowest price. 30 grand for a BYD electric vehicle from China, and puts that into production. The American company competing with them cannot do that. If they want to buy the same truck, they would have to pay not $30,000, that's what the African and the European pay, but $60,000, because they have that 100% tariff on top. They can't compete. You know what they end up buying, as I showed you? They'll end up buying a $40,000 or a $50,000 GM or Ford or Tesla truck. Yeah, but that'll show up in the price of their product because they've had to pay more for the truck than their competitors pay. And that means they're going to lose business. They're going to lay off workers when they lose business. This is not a smart move. Does it protect the workers in the automobile industry? Yes, it does. Because you end up buying a Tesla, a Ford, or a GM, that will go to the workers and keep them working in those factories. But you can't stop the story here. That's ridiculous, the way Mr. Trump does. You have to ask, well, what are the consequences of such a tariff? And I just gave you one. Can we know in advance whether there might not be more Americans losing their jobs because Americans become uncompetitive than there are people who keep their job because they're protected by the tariff? The answer is, I don't know. But here's something to keep in mind. Mr. Trump doesn't know either. Nobody does. That will have to be played out in the real world over the next 2 or 3 years. But the glib way Mr. Trump talks is silly. Here's a second way it's silly. The Chinese are not sitting there like bumps on a log watching all of this. They have an embassy here. They keep real close track of what Mr. Trump says and does. If it turns out that the big policy Mr. Trump has is tariffs, then the Chinese will do exactly what you know they'll do, which is try to figure out how to evade and avoid that weapon. And here's what they have done so far. They have made sure to cultivate markets around the world. And they've gone, for example, to Europe and said, we've got the best, cheapest electric car. Why don't you buy them? In other words, they want the Europeans to make up for whatever market they lose in the United States. And that's exactly what they've done. And you can be damn sure that's what they're going to do. And you know what that means? That the weapon to change China that he thinks he has won't work, because the Chinese have reacted to it to defend themselves, as anybody would, except they have an alliance with enough other countries to make it relatively straightforward where they go and what they have to do to nullify the impact of American strategy. If I were advising Mr. Trump, that would be to explain to him why that's not smart what you're saying, and would be even less smart if it's what you do. American governments, since Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger went to Beijing to open China up back in the 1970s, that's half a century ago, since that time, American policy has been driving China, so it said, to become more like the United States, a free market economy, change its ways. What did China do? Smile. It changed nothing. And the reason is not difficult. It's because China has experienced the fastest economic growth over the last 40 years of any country on this planet. Way faster growth than the United States could enjoy over the last 40 years. Why should they change their system? It's working wonderfully for them. This is, again, a conversation about theater of Mr. Trump. Gestures. I'm taking Greenland. I'm taking the Panama. These are gestures made to convey the image of a powerful leader who does first for America. It's good theater. It got him the presidency. But in terms of dealing with the actual situation, useless.
In the United States, we have problems with historical memory because the Biden administration has used tariffs. They thought they were a powerful weapon against China. Donald Trump believed that tariffs were a powerful weapon, yet we saw that prices actually went up. Trump believes that these tariffs and everything that he is proposing is somehow going to bring back strength. But I'm curious about your economic take on what kind of strength he may be talking about.
Well, again, not to repeat, but to set the context. When empires go down, what is typical, not always, but typical, is that the people at the top, the rich and the powerful, use their wealth, use their power to hold on to what they've accumulated, so that the costs of a declining empire are borne by everybody else. So let's take a look at how the tariff game. And by the way, if you want to know why tariffs are popular, it's because it's something the president can do by a stroke of a pen. Most of the important things in economics are not that easily done. And so Mr. Trump, when he was president, discovered, he didn't talk about tariffs all that much before. He didn't know about it, but he quickly discovered that he can do, and he can look good on TV doing it. And so it became the tool of choice. You know, it's really about the way the system works, and he just takes advantage of it. It's not something particularly effective about tariffs. But if he does it, which he looks like he's going to, the first thing everybody has to understand is that tariffs are a cost imposed on the American buyer of anything brought into the country against whom the tariff is made. So if we put a tariff on electric vehicles from China, then an American who actually buys an electric vehicle from China will be required to pay Uncle Sam a tax for doing so. That's all. So if he puts taxes on Chinese goods or on all goods or on Canadian goods, then it immediately raises the cost of business to an American who buys it, whether that American is a company that buys it for its production or an individual that buys it for its consumption, doesn't matter. It'll be a rising price. All right, now let's take the example of an American company that brings in foreign-made automobiles, say from Mexico, or French wine, or Japanese electronics, or whatever. This company now has to pay the tariff, the import duty, to Uncle Sam. What is the company, the people who own the company, who run it, the board of directors if it's a corporation, the owner or the family of the business if it's a smaller outfit? They have a new cost. They have to pay money to Uncle Sam that they didn't have to pay before. Before they could buy their stuff abroad, use it here, and make that money back when they sold the output. End of story. Now they have an additional cost. What are they likely to do? We all know the employer faced with a higher cost will try, among other things, to raise the price of what he sells to recoup the extra cost that he now faces because he has to pay the tariff to Uncle Sam. So most economists will tell you one of the consequences of imposing tariffs on other countries is that you worsen the inflation at home. So my answer to your question, Danny, is one of the first things that Americans better get ready for is if Mr. Trump goes through with all this talk of tariffs, the inflation we thought we were putting behind us is going to come back. How much? No one can foretell. That depends on the interactions among capitalists and employers as they buy and sell to one another at ever higher prices. But it's a serious problem. Mr. Trump's comments on tariffs never address what that means for the inflation. If he were honest, he would say, well, there's a problem, and it may worse the inflation. So here's what I'm going to do about the inflation. That would be a bit of an honest, we could then discuss whether whatever he's going to do about inflation is adequate to deal. We can't do any of that because he doesn't do any of that. He just waves his hands and acts in his, B-level movie that is his administration. Not only that, but the countries of the world, not just China, the countries of the world can, and many of them will, hit back at the United States because their people will demand it. They're going to be laying off people because they can't sell as much in America since there's a tariff. And the people in Canada or Mexico or Europe are going to turn to their politicians and say, what do? You just allow them to do that? Let's do that to them, at least as a way to get us to have some conversation about getting rid of all of this. But don't just let them stick it to us and we just sit there with our thumbs in our mouths. So guess what? American workers are going to lose their jobs because Europe, to which the United States sells a lot, is putting tariffs up against the United States. Why? In retaliation for what Mr. Trump is threatening to do. And Ms. Sheinbaum in Mexico, the leader there, or whoever the new leader in Canada will soon be, they're going to be under enormous pressure from their own people to retaliate with tariffs. Mr. Trump has a remarkable way of talking about tariffs as if it's all a one-way street, as it's something the United States chooses or chooses not to do. But that's not the way it works at all. Never has been. You impose a tariff, you are literally provoking those against whom that tariff works to do the same back to you. And it will hurt the United States because, unlike in the past, the United States is now integrated into the world economy. It needs a lot of exports. It needs those markets. It will be hurt if it loses them. All of these factors, again, should underscore, don't take so seriously what Mr. Trump is bloviating about these days. He's continuing the theater that got him elected. I'm really on your side. I'm not going to be held back by convention. I do the unspeakable. I say the unsayable. Yeah, I get it. That's how he did it. I'm impressed. I wouldn't have thought it were possible. But that's all it is. At this point, we don't know what he's actually going to try to do. We do not know whether it can be done. And we do not know what retaliation the victims of what he's doing will themselves figure out. But they're not all going to be passive and sit there and say we have to accept it. You might see the billionaires go down there, get down on one knee and beg for, yeah, he wants that, they do it. But the rest of the world, nah, not so much. Doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for the king of this or the prime minister of that to play that kind of role, and they're not going to do it. And the United States is less able to compel that behavior today than it has been for the last half century.
I don't think that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin talking on the phone directly after Trump's inauguration was any coincidence. BRICS, the rest of the world, they're watching this, and they will move closer together and align themselves away from the United States. The more that Donald Trump tries to provoke and push them further into what he hopes will be economic abyss, but which seems to be the opposite, because oftentimes tariffs are talked about as it's going to help reindustrialize the United States. In 30 seconds, do you have a response to that?
In 30 seconds, that's the answer. Every one of the last 10, count them, 10 presidents of the United States has said either at his inauguration or around that time, one of my things, I'm going to bring back manufacturing. I am going to get every one of them, and not a single one of them achieved it. This is bleh. This is verbiage. This is word salad. Everybody knows it's a serious problem that the United States has outsourced the bulk of its manufacturing to China, India, Brazil, and the rest of the world, many in the BRICS. And it's not coming back because the wages here remain too high for what they want to pay. And the growing market in the world is no longer the United States. It's in China. And the bottom line, the BRICS, 22 countries now represent over 55% of the world's population. The United States is 4.5% of the world's population. You ought to keep these numbers in mind before you make cataclysmic policy and strategic mistakes.